Yes, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live podcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's a pleasure to be back with you on this beautiful Friday morning, the 1st of May, 2026. It's International Labor Day, so happy Labor Day to you all, our workers out there. I hope you do enjoy this day. I hope you find a reason to celebrate this day. Of course, ordinarily, it should be a day off for many of you, but I know for a fact that it isn't always the case. So I will understand if you are if you will watch this conversation, whether later or live, while at your place of work. So but nonetheless, we are glad to be back. As I speak, it's raining down here in Kampala. 39 minutes are past the hour of 9 a.m. A bit of a slide today to the start of this. We had started, then had to stop it for some reason. We had an interruption. Then a phone call came in, and nonetheless, it's a pleasure to be here for this discussion this beautiful morning. And welcome back from last night's action. Last night, we did witness Aston Villa be beaten at the hands of Nottingham Forest in the UEFA Europa League for the first leg. So much so that Una Emery did not take that too well. Of course, nobody takes too well a defeat, but this has everything to do with the fact that he thinks that VAR should have intervened for Elliot Anderson's supposedly dangerous tackle on Oli Watkins. So it's a bit of a subjective one. I do not know why you guys fall on that one, but the tackle in itself, in the action of it, did look ugly. It's one that would have warranted at least a yellow card for the intent of it, for how he comes out. But nothing was given. Nothing was given. Not even a yellow card, because Elliot Anderson is just to have won the ball, and of course, play went on. So it's a bit of a difficult one. It's a bit of a difficult one, I must acknowledge. But sometimes you get these decisions, sometimes you do not get them. It's basically the nature of the sport. I do not know how many times we've been here in the aftermath of the game and discussed more the referee's decisions that happened or that did not happen than the game itself. And I find that very, very unfortunate. But this time around, that won't be the case, because it was a fairly beautiful night in the world of football, really, for those games. For those of you that are just joining us, welcome to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is my name. Football Tribe, as you can see, branded t-shirt. I hope you're doing well. Kindly like the broadcast, but also consider subscribing to the channel. Let me know where you're joining us from, what team do you support, and all those things. Let's engage down in the comment section. I'll be reading each and every one of your single comments. Okay, so Nottingham Forest won by 1-0. Braga beat up against Freiburg by 2-1. Rayo Vallecano beat up against Strasbourg by 1-0, as well as Crystal Palace winning away to Shakhtar Donetsk by 3-1. So we'll get into a little bit of that before we then move on to our weekend preview, because it does promise to be a blockbuster weekend, with action kicking off today for match day 35 of the Premier League, when Leeds take on Burnley. Leeds must win. Leeds must win, because their Premier League status is what is at stake. So we'll get to discuss that. But in as far as the game was concerned between Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa did go, I did not think that there were so many differences between the two sides in terms of chances created, in terms of overall dominance on the ball. It was a bit of a 50-50. It was an evenly matched kind of game of football for two Premier League opponents. And usually, this is what makes these games difficult. If you want the perfect example for this, you ought to go back to the UEFA Champions League playoffs when PSG knocked out AC Monaco. I think that game went down 5-4 on aggregate, for which Monaco got 2 red cards, one in each of the two legs. So it tells you how close it was. And yet, fast forward, when it came to the round of 16, PSG demolished Chelsea. They knocked them out 8-2 on aggregate. Then they met they met Liverpool and knocked them 4-0 on aggregate. So what am I trying to say? That when it's a domestic league derby in these cup competitions like the Champions League, Europa League, Conference League, or anywhere else, usually it's a close tie. Good morning, Milton. How are you doing, sir? Then the other example I can give you is go back to the quarterfinals of the UEFA Champions League between Barcelona and Atletico de Madrid, another closely contested fixture there. Atletico de Madrid winning the first leg by 2-0, losing the reverse fixture by 2-1, and advancing 3-2 on penalties. On aggregate score. So there were close ties. Why? It's a domestic derby. You're talking about teams that know each other one too well, that have already played each other almost twice in the season. And for those of you that can't remember, for the Atletico Barcelona game, they had just played each other the weekend prior before going into the UEFA Champions League round of ties. So it's usually that close a contest. So guys, those that have just joined us, kindly like the broadcast, but also consider subscribing to the channel. And do me an absolute favor, like the broadcast. So every action you take does help this channel continue to grow. So do me that absolute honor and favor. My name is Robert Kesakos, and I'm coming to you live from Uganda. For those of you that are wondering, I have to repeat that because it's one of the frequently asked questions in regards to where I am from. So yesterday, Nottingham Forest against Aston Villa had a semblance of that familiarity of two teams playing in the same league, having already played each other before, not much to separate the two sides in terms of head-to-head, because there had been a 1-1 draw just in this same month between the two sides, and then earlier on in the season, Aston Villa had beaten up against Nottingham Forest by 3-1. We're talking about a Nottingham Forest side that is battling against relegation, but that 71st minute penalty from Chris Wood is what separated the two ties across the 90 minutes. An XG of 1.5 for Nottingham Forest and 0.79 for Aston Villa, who had 4 shots on target compared to 5 shots on target for Nottingham Forest. But Nottingham Forest were really, really threatening. You could see that they played with a sort of comfort, maybe in a way of being the home team. They had the home crowd backing them, so it was really, really impressive to watch, to say the least. It was really, really impressive to watch, to say the least. So it's one that Vita Pereira would have been sort of pleased with. But also defensively, I thought they did really, really well, because if they can go away to Villa Park and take the same sort of defensive discipline, I bet you not, they could pick a result. They could stand Aston Villa. They could stand Aston Villa. The football tribe shirt is excellent. Thank you so much, Mr. Milton. So really, what we when it comes to these knockout competitions, margins can be that small. They can be really, really that small. So everything else is how should I put it? You ought to leave nothing to chance. You ought to leave nothing to chance. So going into the reverse fixture, Unai Emery will know that too well, given all his experience in as far as this competition is concerned. He will know one too well. But like I said, he did not seem too pleased in the manner in which maybe one of the decisions or the key decisions in the game was handled. But in the context of the overall tie, he said the match is not finished. It continues next week. We must come back. So he knows that he must find a way to seek a reaction from those players. And we're talking about a Nottingham Forest side that are fairly known for this competition. They have won it before, but they won the the European Cup back in the days. I think that was 1983, around that period. So it's sort of different. Aston Villa have also won it before. No, is it Aston Villa who won it 83 in Amsterdam? I think it was Aston Villa, who have that history. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make is, it's far from done. A 1-0 margin is a huge advantage, But it's not that big a deal because you can easily lose that advantage in as early as the first minute. Go to the Crystal Palace game yesterday as a beat up against Shakhtar Donetsk. Ismail Sarr scored in the first minute of the game. He scored in the first minute of the game. So that clearly tells you that you can easily lose that 1-0 advantage in as early as the first minute, and it would be all back to square one, and you have to do it all over again. So for me, it goes to speak to that. So very, very decent performance from both sides. Only one winner on the night. One will be the happier boss. Like I said, Unai Emery, he said the VAR is so bad. It's a clear red card. I do not understand why the VAR are not calling the referee because it's so clear. It's a huge mistake. VAR is responsible. So you remember, he holds VAR responsible for that action that I was telling you about between Elliot Anderson and what's his name? And Ollie Watkins. Yes. Ollie Watkins. He goes on to say that the referee, fantastic job, 10 out of 10. I appreciated how he managed the match for 90 minutes, but I watched it back. Wow, huge. He could break his ankle. VAR, where are you? It is your responsibility. We are professionals. It was so clear for everybody. He could break his ankle. It's not fair. Like I said, when you look at the action, the way Elliot Anderson comes in for that attack, he comes all guns blazing. He comes in heavy, almost with double legs. But because he wins the ball and Ollie Watkins has jumped in a way, I think that's how he escapes the red card. And because the referee has not seen it, VAR cannot intervene for, or has not seen it for what it is. VAR cannot intervene to say you ought to give a yellow card to Elliot Anderson for what he just did there. So unless it's a red card, and based on their own interpretation as VAR, they did not think that the tackle warranted a red card. But when you watch it back, when you go and take a look at it, there's something really uneasy about it. Like the way he comes in, all guns blaze, and it's so fast. But because he wins the ball, he escapes with it. So anyways, we'll leave that at that. But Aston Villa will know that they have a great deal of work to do going into the reverse fixture. Then that will be next week on Thursday at Villa Park. Then Braga won by 2-1 against Freiburg. Remember, these are the two semi-finals for the UEFA Europa League. An 8th-minute goal from Tiknaz gave Braga the lead, while Griffo scored in the 16th minute to restore parity, and then there was a missed penalty by Zaiza. That was in the 2nd minute of stoppage time of the first stanza, and then Douglas did score in the 2nd minute of stoppage time to win it for Braga. Otherwise, Freiburg thought they had held on to a 1-1 draw. Then Vallecano managed to escape it thanks to Alemao's goal in the second half, in the 54th minute. It is what separated the two sides. Strasbourg at the quarterfinals had a 2-0 deficit after the first leg, and they went into the reverse fixture and overturned it. For those of you that can't remember when those quarterfinal games were played, I remember they were playing against Mainz 05, yes, from the German Bundesliga. Those were their opponents. Anyways, then Crystal Palace on the other side, like I said, were 3-1 winners away to Shakhtar Donetsk. Ismail Sarr with the opener, then Daichi Kamada in the second half, that was around the 58th minute, and then Jürgen Strand-Larsen in the 84th minute. Sort of put the icing on the cake, but that was all after Ochereto had scored to restore parity in as early as the 47th minute. It was 1-0 at halftime. Then quickly after the restart, they restored parity. Unfortunately, they could not hold on to it. First last says evening. Good evening to you if it is evening on your time. So Anyways, guys, allow us to leave the UEFA Europa League and the Conference League at that. Tonight, which is Friday night football, expect action between Leeds United and Burnley. That's in the Premier League. Girona against Mallorca. In the Spanish La Liga, Pisa against Lecce. In the Italian Serie A, for some of the key games you ought to look forward to. Now, here's what you should expect in as far as the Premier League overall for match day 35 is concerned. Saturday, you have no early kickoff, but you do have games starting at 5 p.m. Between Brentford and West Ham at 5 p.m. Newcastle against Brighton. Remember, Newcastle have lost the last 4 consecutive games, so there's something to worry for Ed Howe about there. Wolverhampton Wanderers, who have nothing to play for, will entertain Sunderland at the Molineux, while in the late kickoff of Saturday at 7:30 p.m., Arsenal will be in the London Derby against Fulham. Not the kind of game they would love to be playing at this time, given the context of the Premier League title, but they have to play it anyway. And also, they have an opportunity to go 6 points clear. Not that it will make a whole huge of a difference, but as they wait for Manchester City to play on Monday. So maybe if a victory could help them put a bit of pressure on Manchester City. But if they fail to win, whether it's a draw, whether it's a lose, then they will have simply gone to the Premier League and said, please give us the Premier League trophy. Let's carry it over to the Etihad Stadium. Basically, that's what they would have done for themselves. That tie was crazy. Which one are you talking about first, last? Are you talking about the one between Bayern Munich and PSG? Is that the one you're making reference to? Anyways, moving on. On Super Sunday, again, action will come at 4 p.m. between Bournemouth and Crystal Palace. Those two will be in action. You say Athletic, the one over Atletico de Madrid versus Athletic Bilbao, which ended 3-2 in favor of Madrid, or you're talking about Atletico versus Arsenal? Which one? Please give me more clarity first, last there. So on Super Sunday, Bournemouth against Crystal Palace at 4 p.m. Then at 5:30 p.m., Manchester United, in the biggest game of match day 35, will entertain Liverpool at Old Trafford. We'll get to talk about that game as well. Aston Villa against Tottenham Hotspur at 9 p.m. Very, very crucial fixture, by the way. Very, very crucial fixture to look forward to. And then on Monday night, it's supposed to be Monday night football, but there's an early kickoff. For the first time in the quickest memory of my football, I have not seen English football come as early as 5 p.m. East African time, which is ordinarily 3 p.m. UK time on a Monday. That's between Chelsea and Nottingham Forest. I do not know what on 4th May the UK will be celebrating, but whatever it is, it better be a holiday. Or you say Atletico versus Arsenal. Yeah, bit of a crazy one, given some of the things that did transpire. And then at 4 p.m., sorry, not 4 p.m., at 10 p.m., Everton will take on Manchester City. Now, let me give you a slight teaser on that one. Everton, Manchester City. A lot of people seem to think that Everton is the only difficult opponent that Man City have to face, and therefore, majority of Arsenal fans are hoping against hope that it is Everton that does them the favor to cause an upset against Manchester City. Isn't this what I've been singing all along, to say you cannot leave the destiny of your team in the hands of another opponent? It sort of puts you in an awkward situation. It puts you in that situation where it puts you in that kind of situation where you do not have control over your own destiny. And basically that's what they've done. Anyways, let's go through these games one by one. We'll see what we'll handle. If we're unable to complete them in the interest of time, we still have Friday night when we come at 9 p.m. We still have Saturday morning. So be sure we'll be dissecting all your games. Let's start off with Leeds against Burnley. Like I said, it's a must win for Leeds United. First of all, it's a home game for them. They are going to be at Elland Road. They lost the first leg by 2-0. This was very early on in the season, around October. So, and then in recent times, Leeds have not done too bad for themselves. They've once on some games, but in comparison to Burnley, their form is almost incomparable. Leeds have at least amassed as many as 9 points from the last possible 15. Burnley have only taken 1 point from the last possible 15. So you can hardly compare that. But the reason as why I say it's a must win is when you look at the Premier League table, you know for a fact that Leeds are not yet safe. Mathematically, their life is still on the line. They are 15th with 40 points. Now, at 40 points, that's only 6 points adrift of Tottenham Hotspurs, who are 18th on the Premier League table with 4 games still left to play. That means there's 12 points still left to play for. Therefore, if you're Leeds United, you're safe. It also qualifies to say that Newcastle and Crystal Palace ordinarily, mathematically, are equally not yet safe, but they're in a much better place. So therefore, Leeds United, if they win tonight's game, they can go to 43 points and by the leap for Newcastle. Because of their fairly bigger negative goal difference, they may not be able to leapfrog Crystal Palace. They may be on parity, but the key point is that they have to find a way to win against Burnley. Burnley part ways with manager Scott Parker on mutual consent. It's sort of been a long time coming in a way. And Michael Jackson has taken over as an interim until the end of the season. I've seen this movie before. Michael Jackson took over before when Vincent Kompany left the club to join Bayern Munich. But for Burnley, it's been a bit of a cycle. Remember, in the 2022-2023 campaign, they won the championship with Vincent Kompany. I think they had about 101 points and were promoted to the Premier League. 2023-2024, Vincent Kompany and Burnley played entertaining football, but struggled to win games. They conceded lots of goals. They ended up being relegated. Scott Parker took charge, brought them back to the Premier League. They played good football, just couldn't win games, conceded goals for fun, like literally, and they are back in the same place where they were. When you think about it that way and the context of it, it reminds you of how you ought to appreciate, in a way, the excellent job that Sean Dyche did with that Burnley team. That team that had Rodriguez, Ben Mee, Chris Wood, he was doing a really, really good job. He was really, really doing a good job. And because they stayed in the Premier League for quite some time and even at one time qualified for a European competition, So, but it is what it is. When you look at the last 5 meetings between the two sides, I think Leeds have the lion's share of 3 victories, only 1 draw between the two sides. That was a 1-1 draw. And then, of course, the 2-0 victory earlier on this season for Burnley against Leeds. Now, if there's anything dangerous at this stage of the season, is playing against a team who have nothing to lose. And for Burnley, they have nothing to lose. All they are playing for, whether home or away from home, is basically for the entertainment of their fans and their own reputation. It's as simple as that. Do they have a bone to pick with Leeds? Maybe, but they are going to play with such freedom, with such bit of ease, with zero concern about the end result of sort of, if they win, so be it. It doesn't change anything. They are still a relegated team. They and Wolverhampton Wanderers. That 1-0 defeat that 1-0 defeat literally against Manchester City sealed their fate. And the 4-1 loss against Nottingham Forest in their very last league outing did not help the cause. So we're talking about a side that has lost 4 of the last 5 games against Fulham, Brighton, Manchester City, and Nottingham Forest. Leeds on the other side have beaten up against Wolves, drew against Bournemouth, beat Man United, drew against Brentford and Crystal Palace, goalless draws. They've had a fairly good season, having reached the semi-finals of the FA Cup, where they got knocked out by Chelsea, who beat them by 1-0. That's last weekend. Enzo Fernandez's goal separated the two sides. So you look at it and think to yourself, they've been done well. But Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Ampadu, Jayden Bogo, James Justin, Aronson, these are guys that are really, really capable. Chipes, hi. Hi, how are you doing? I'm good. I'm working right now, but I came to say hi. Thank you so much, Chipes, for remembering to do that. I really, really appreciate it a great deal when somebody is busy. But then they squeeze in a minute to come and say hello, even though they can't stay for long. So much appreciated, Chipes. So now, like I said, my expectation by the way is for Leeds United to win this game by 3 goals to 1. I think they're going to give it their full go at it. Why? Because when you assess all their remaining games for Leeds United, if there's a game that should qualify for an easier fixture to win, it should be the Burnley game. Because after Burnley, you play Tottenham Hotspurs. Tottenham Hotspurs is a direct relegation battle rival. So you'd want by the time you face them, you are still 6 points ahead of them. That even when they win against you, you still have some leg room to dance through. Then after facing Tottenham Hotspurs, the other game is against Brighton. Yes, it will be at Aaron Road, but it's Brighton. It's not an easy game. Brighton have ambitions of playing European football. So it makes it a difficult tie. Then after that, on the final day of the season, you have arguably another final day relegation battle decider. We do not know what the context of the table will be by that point, but the final day of the season, Leeds have to play West Ham. So it could boil down to the case that on the final day, whoever wins between West Ham and Leeds United gets to stay up. Or maybe Leeds have already confirmed their stay, but it becomes a must win maybe for West Ham to win and stay up at the expense of Tottenham Hotspurs. So the circumstances could be different, but it will be no less important a game. But how we get there, or the outlook of the Premier League table at the end of the season will determine. Therefore, if you're Daniel Fakir, you must be thinking to yourself, out of these 4 fixtures, they are all difficult fixtures, but surely Burnley is the most, if we're ranking them in terms of which one is a must win, where we have to break our legs if need be for us to get it over the line. It should be this Burnley fixture. And then we take it from there because that takes you to 43 points. And I remember the team that ever got relegated with the highest number of points was West Ham United back in 2003. Yes, the 2003 campaign, they amassed as many as 42 points, but still got relegated at the expense of it was I think Bolton Wanderers who stayed up that season. Yes, Bolton Wanderers stayed up that season. That was 2002, 2003. So West Ham know the drill, but I'm sure Leeds are not oblivious to those facts as well. So really, I expect Leeds to win this game by 3 goals to 1. Like I said, I do not want to dissect so much into what Burnley can bring on the table because on a given day, a Premier League game can end either way. But the Flemings of this world, Carl Walker, Martin Dubravka, have not done much to sort of uplift this Burnley side to have a leg on to stand, to even have a fighting chance in this relegation battle. So Milton says, as we reach the end of the season, it's a real battle for relegation and promotion also. Exactly. That's basically what it boils down to. But Burnley have already been confirmed to have been relegated. It's good as done for them. They have to go through their remaining games as an obligation, But for Leeds United, they still have their Premier League status to fight for. So I've gone for them to find a way to win this game by 3 goals to 1. It may be close, but at the end of the day, I expect Leeds to, pull through. Then Brentford against West Ham. The ugly thing about football or professional football is that there are no favors. I'll give you an example. If Brentford win against West Ham, it takes them to 51 points, puts them in contention for those European places. But West Ham on the other side are fighting for their lives. If they do lose against Brentford and Tottenham Hotspur find a way to win in the same weekend, then the script changes for West Ham. So equally, West Ham can leave nothing to chance. Unfortunately, like I said, there are no favors. Brentford cannot lose this game to the pleasure of West Ham simply because they are fighting for their lives. It just doesn't happen for that way. For which European football team has the best defense right now in terms of conceding less goals? I'm particularly not sure, but I wouldn't be too surprised if it were Bayern Munich because they score loads of goals. They score loads of goals and do not concede that much. Oh, actually, no, it's not that. It could be Bayern Munich. I'm thinking to myself, I'm not particularly sure. I'm not particularly sure. But but no, they've conceded many. They've conceded 32. Arsenal have conceded about 29, which I feel is a high number to concede, by the way. No, they've conceded 26. When you go to the Italian Serie A, I think, let me see. Italian Serie A, Inter have also been good at conceding sometimes. So they've conceded as many as what? Let's see how Inter performed. They've conceded as many as 31. I do not think Barcelona are it. It could be Arsenal, by the way. It could be Arsenal that have conceded the least number of goals. But also, interestingly, now that you raise that, there's a team that has scored the fewest number of goals. Barcelona have conceded 30. There's a team that has scored the fewest number of goals. Sorry, have scored the fewest number of goals. Okay, maybe not the fewest overall, but they have scored fewer goals than only one team has scored fewer goals than them. Now, that's the team bottom of the table. Go to the Spanish La Liga and look at Getafe. They've scored 28 goals and have conceded about 34. Their goal difference is -6, but they have scored 28 goals, but they are sixth on the Spanish La Liga table. And Rio Oviedo, who have scored the least number of goals in the league, are bottom of the table. They are under the charges of Jose Bodalas. Yes, Jose Bodalas is their manager. He's the king of dark arts, or that conservative football. Okay. Hi Ash, I don't know what your comment was, but you seem to have retracted it. But I'll bet on the fact that you resubmit. Anyways, Milton says the fewest goals in a domestic competition or in the UEFA Champions League. I think even when you go to the UEFA Champions League, it is still Arsenal, because look at in the knockout stages, they've only conceded 2 goals, one against Bayer Leverkusen and one against Atletico de Madrid. In the ties against Sporting CP, they did not concede any. When you go back to the league phase, I think they conceded about 4, one against Bayern Munich, one against Inter Milan, and 2 against Kairat Almaty. About 4 or 5 goals. So still their defense has done tremendously well, or fairly well. Ash says Aston Villa lost again. We can beat them. We can beat them 1-0 here. Okay, Ash, we're going to get your game in terms of the preview of it. But if you needed any indication that Aston Villa can be beat, they've now lost 2 games on the spin, against Fulham and against Nottingham Forest, all by a 1-0 margin. In other words, and by the way, they're going to play your game preoccupied with trying to overturn the first leg deficit. So at least you may have that to your leverage in terms of the psychology of the game. But let's go through the Brentford West Ham game. Like I said, unfortunately, in the Premier League or in professional football, there are no favors. For you, who is the best offensive player right now? Best offensive player? Now, that's a subjective decision. That's a subjective thing, Chipes. Why? Because when you say the most offensive player, one would say, do you mean the one that has scored the most number of goals, or do you think the one that has created the most chances in terms of going forward? But I'll give you a list of names, and then maybe you'll choose, because it's not as straightforward as you want to make it appear or seem. Michael Olise, Harry Kane, Kylian Mbappe, Luis Diaz. Those are some of the players that I can think of. Of course, in a way, you can add Braut Erling Haaland because of his numbers, but I think the other ones are ahead of him, not by numbers, but when you watch them play. But forget not, there is also Kivica Kvaratskhelia. So Ash says Luis Diaz. So it's a bit subjective. If you want to stick to the statistics, they may give you a different picture, but nonetheless, it would still be a picture painted in fact, backed by numbers. When you go for eye test, what we usually call what you see when you're watching the game of football, you may tilt to a different name. But I wouldn't disagree with Ash, even though somebody else can as well make the same case for Michael Olise. Do you think one of them will end as the world champion in the World Cup? I do not see Colombia winning the World Cup. Maybe England have a chance. France have a chance. That's for Hurricane and Michael Olise. Kylian Mbappe with France, there's a chance. Kivica Kvaratskhelia with Georgia, no, absolutely not. Even Georgia are going to be at the World Cup. I don't think so. By the way, are they going to be? No, Georgia are not going to be at the World Cup. So Kivica Kvaratskhelia cannot even qualify. Ousmane Dembele. Blastoise says Doe. You see, it's subjective. Blastoise thinks it's Desli Doe. Although I wouldn't want to think so. I wouldn't put him in the top 4, in my humble opinion. Blastoise. I hope you indulge me on that one. So, guys, allow me retreat or digress a bit back. So I'll do the preview as I answer your questions bit by bit. So if I take a moment to answer your question, please indulge me if I'm concluding on a different topic. So, like I said, at the professional level, there are no favors. If there were favors, Brentford would say, yeah, we will play to lose this game against West Ham so that West Ham live to fight on another day for their Premier League status. But it doesn't happen that way. So it makes it a difficult game. Keith Andrews still has ambitions to finish with the highest number of points possible in the highest position possible on the Premier League log. If the last game is anything to live by, their 2-1 defeat against Manchester United is all you need to know. But we're talking about the Brentford side that are winless in the last 6-7 games. They're about. Why? Because prior to losing to Man United by 2-1, they had drawn the last 5 consecutive games. And I said this, when a team draws so many games, 2 things are likely to happen. Either they are about to win a game of football or they are about to lose a game of football. So that is basically what happened. They lost to Manchester United. It was a perfect score prediction for us here on the channel. They lost by 2-1. On the other side, West Ham managed to grind it out and beat up against Everton by 2-1. Now, I was a bit intrigued. Of course, they won it late through Callum Wilson, that goal coming very late on in the game, in the 2nd minute of stoppage time. But nonetheless, they won. A great sigh of relief for Nuno Espirito Santo, as it was for all his players, on the day. Somebody is asking, Milton says, the Bayern players are certainly very attacking. Okay. Then Blastoise says, Tchouaméni is not good enough to play for Real Madrid season by season. Release him. Even Caicedo is better. Caicedo looks better in a certain system. He's looked very brilliant under Maresca, but under Liam Rasinia, not so good. So maybe you ought to think about that. But I'd want to think that Tchouaméni would be a good squad player for Real Madrid. Remember the time when Real Madrid had Xabi Alonso, when they had Sami Khedira, So you feel that there is a bit of a drop-off. When they subsequently had Casemiro, you feel that there is a bit of a drop-off. But if I had to part ways between the two of Camavinga and Tchouaméni, I would keep Tchouaméni and let go of Camavinga. That's how I'd want to look at it, Blastoise. Then Adash says hi. Hi, Adash. Good to have you back on the podcast. So, West Ham away to Brentford at the GTEC Stadium. Of course, Brentford will have the comfort of being at home. 9 games played between the two sides. Only 1 win for West Ham in this particular fixture. Only 1 draw and 7 losses. That's West Ham losing to Brentford. And if the last 5 games are anything to live by, they have lost 3 of the last 5 to Brentford. They've drawn 1 in a 1-1 draw. That was last season. And then You have a 4-2 victory for West Ham, but that was at the London Stadium. It makes the fixture really, really hard for them. But like I keep saying, if you're desperately fighting for your lives, like West Ham are, you have no excuse other than if you had done by referees' decisions, if you get a red card, or you suffer some form of misfortune or numerical disadvantage in the context of the game, you should be leaving your bodies on the line. You should be winning in whichever way possible. First of all, the beauty about Nuno Espirito Santo is the kind of manager that can play that conservative football, that conservative game of football that sort of frustrates an opponent into almost not scoring or into scoring very few goals. And then they look to catch you on the counter-attack. So the expectation we should have here is that, of course, Brentford do not have so much different in style, but I'd want to see those players rise to the occasion. Players like Konstantinos Mavropanos, that is when it comes to the defensive work. Malik Diouf, Axel Disasi, Carl Walker-Peters. I don't know who is going to be in goal. Sometimes it's Mads Hermansen, sometimes it's Alfonso Ariola, so I do not know. Then when it comes to the midfield, Matthias Fernandes, Somerville, Thomas Suchek, now is the time to rise to the occasion. Gerard Bowen as captain, now is the time to inspire your team to victory. If one of the legendary players at West Ham or in West Ham history is Mark Noble, so Gerard Bowen, how do you want to be viewed? Do you want to enter the realms of Mark Noble? You do it by helping your team survive relegation, and it also continues with not just beating Everton, but also moving on to beat Brentford. If you beat Brentford, if you beat Everton, then that means it's also possible to beat Brentford. So it doesn't mean it will be easy. It means it's not impossible. It is doable. It is only impossible until it's been done, So unfortunately, instinctively, my gut feeling says it could end in a 1-1 draw. It's not the result that they would want. That's for West Ham. It's not the result that they would want, but it could end in a 1-1 draw. However, the selfish part of me that means well for West Ham would love to see them win at least by 2-1. So separate the two things. The wishful part of me and the objective part of me that thinks that it will end in a 1-1 draw. All right, back to some of your comments. Blastoise says Bellingham should join other. Since Mbappe signed, he turned into a Gallagher. Guys, the one thing you have to remember about Real Madrid is Real Madrid has always been a collection of stars. There's always more than one big name at the same time. Go back to Cristiano Ronaldo, Karim Benzema, His Excellency Kaka, Mesut Ozil, Gonzalo Higuain. At one point, you had Raul Gonzalez in there. He had to be pulled out to create room for Cristiano Ronaldo with his shirt number 7, etc., etc. Vinicius Jr. was the king of Real Madrid. Then Kylian Mbappe walks in to dethrone him. That's why that relationship is not going so far too well. At some point, it looked like they had accepted that Vinicius Jr. was going to be Kylian Mbappe's creator. But once in a while, or every now and then, you see that chemistry break down, So I do not think, by the way, Jude Bellingham, yes, he's not hit the heights of his debut season that he had about 2 seasons ago. He's not hit those heights. But this season has also been partly capitalized with injuries. When you have a switching managers, sometimes it doesn't help some players. It affects them in one or the other, depending on how they are used by different managers. But yeah, he's been such a drop-off this season. So, however, I don't think he's been a Gallagher, Okay, Ash says, have you mentioned Gallagher? Blastoise says, yes, he is the worst midfielder in the Premier League, like Tottenham worst team. Why Raul Asensio is not playing? Raul Asensio is not the best centre-back there is. Now, let's look at Real Madrid's defenders. You have David Alaba, who unfortunately is often always injured, Eder Militao, Antonio Rudiger, Dean Howson, Raul Asensio. Unless there's any one that I've forgotten out of the center backs. But Raul Asensio is not even in the top four. I'll go with Eder Militao, Antonio Rudiger, Dean Howson, David Alaba. And what puts David Alaba in fourth place is because of his injury record. Because I constantly say one of the hallmarks of a good player or an exceptional player is them constantly being available for selection for their team. He does not do that. And that's why they are parting ways with him at the end of the season. I am one of the school of thought that Real Madrid should part ways with Raul Asensio in the best way they can see how. Let him go and get more development elsewhere. Christian Mosquera is better than Raul Asensio, in my humble opinion. Defensively, in my humble opinion. So I do not rate him that highly. I've said they need to part ways with David Alaba. They need to keep Eder Militao and Antonio Rudiger for experience purposes. Dean Howson is still a youngster, still learning his trade. He has a lot to learn. Then part ways with Raul Asensio. Get an elite centre back. I don't know who you're going to go for. I don't know if you can tempt Arsenal into selling you William Saliba. I don't know if you're going to tempt them into giving you Gabriel Magalhaes. I do not know if you're going to go to Arsenal and say, I know you have this agreement with, even Jakub Kivior is better. I do not know who they look to because Chelsea do not have an elite centre back. Okay, maybe Levi Colwill and Wesley Fofana, but consistently they've not yet proven themselves. But as a partnership, they look good. You at Manchester United, which centre back are you going to poach? At Tottenham Hotspur, people have mixed reactions about Mickey van de Ven. Are you going to go to Brighton and pick out John Paul Van Hecke? Jeremy Jacquet has already been snatched. Maybe you go to Sporting CP and pick out Diomande. So I do not know, but he's just not good enough in my humble opinion. Okay. Ash says, hey, who you calling worst team? Do you know Tottenham? I support the club, which is 10 times bigger than yours. That's Blastoise. I don't know what team he supports, by the way. Imagine supporting Tottenham. It's also a team. It's also a team. It's also a team. By the way, banter aside, Tottenham, go back to the Mauricio Pochettino era. Do you remember that in the 2016-2017 season, Tottenham finished second on the Premier League log with 86 points? Chelsea were champions. You remember they played the finals of the UEFA Champions League? They're not that bad a team. Yes, they've had 2 bad years, last year and this year, which last year you cannot argue is the worst year because they finished 17th on the Premier League log. They won the UEFA Europa League. So even in their worst year, they came out with a piece of silverware. This year, though, is one that they will live to either forget quickly or regret, depending on how the season finishes. Tottenham is a beautiful club. Do not try to talk us down for our current season. Go support your team, 10 times bigger club. I can't stand Tottenham. They should be relegated to League One. Wow. Okay, you started from mentioning Gallagher. Was I wrong? I hope you get relegated. Ash, not too impressed. Of course, but take it for what it is. That's what happens with opposing fans. Chipe says, I did not get that one. If my translator was supposed to translate it for me, it hasn't. So I do not understand the language. I don't want to insult your language by reading what's the wrong way. Ash says, nah, that was just luck. They are not good enough for the Premier League. Okay. Then Milton says Tottenham seem to have all these problems since Chairman Daniel Levy stepped down. I'd want to think their problems started long before he stepped down, because he stepped down into the start of this season. But last season, they also didn't do themselves any wonders. Unfortunately, injuries have been a large part of that. They need a review of their medical department, because when you go back to their problems last season, majority of them rotated around injuries, and this season has not been any different. Look, you welcome James Maddison back from an anterior cruciate ligament injury, and then Xavi Simons goes in the opposite direction for the similar injury. You know, so you've had Bentancur, Dijat Kuzeski, Dominic Solanke, literally every single outfielded player there getting injured, including Guillermo Vicario, who needed to undergo hernia surgery. So, I mean, it's just not been pretty for them, or very, very fortunate for them. And I usually say luck is a key element of sport. I do not know where Tottenham's luck fall in as far as things go at the moment. Okay. I was talking about Forest. Okay. Forest is far better. Is far better from you, Rottenham. Leicester City is waiting for you. Leicester City were relegated to League One. If Tottenham get relegated, they'll be playing in the Championship. Chip says it's Spanish, but it's okay if you can't spell. It's a difficult word to spell. Okay. Thank you so much for indulging me, Chipes there. Spanish is a very romantic language that I would love to learn. However, not on this forum. Not on this forum. People have gotten me to say things that are unworthy. Guys, allow me to move on. Newcastle versus Brighton. Like I said, bit of a difficult game. What makes it difficult is I do not know if there's a manager who has been in his job for as long as he's been, whose job has come into question, like that of Ed Howe. Remember, he joined Newcastle back in November 2021, taking over from Steve Bruce and saved them from relegation. Then the subsequent season, he guided them to Champions League qualification, finishing fourth on the league table and things like that, basically. And then went on to win them their first major trophy in 71 years. That's how highly regarded Ed Howe is at Newcastle. Twice he's led them to UEFA Champions League qualification. But this season, as far as things have gone, they've not gone his way. They've lost their last 4 consecutive Premier League games. Their last victory was against Chelsea, 1-0. They've struggled for results. They are up against a Brighton side who have won 4 of their last 5 league games, so they're in really, really good form. I mean, does it get any worse than this? They come up against a side whose record against is not that brilliant. 17 meetings between Newcastle and Brighton, 8 draws, 7 wins for Brighton, and only 2 for Newcastle. Tell me how this is a good time for Newcastle to be playing Brighton. Last weekend, they lost by a goal to nil at Arsenal. They could have drawn, but not that they played any better or in a more serious manner that warranted them earning a point out of that. So this season, they lost by 2-1 at the Amex. Last season, there was a 1-1 draw at the Amex and a 1-0 loss against the same side at St. James's Park. So it's not the kind of fixture that they relish. I do not know what's gone so wrong, so bad for a manager like Ed Howe, but he needs to find a way to get back to winning ways. Of course, his overall campaign will be assessed at the end of the season, and they review what their problems were. Of course, they date to as far back as the summer when they missed out on all their primary targets in Brian Mbeumo, in Joao Pedro, in Hugo Ekitike, subsequently Benjamin Sesko, losing Alexander Isak, all that. You ended up with an Anthony Elanga, with Nick Woltmada, with Yohan Wissa, with Jacob Ramsey, with Aaron Ramsdale as a substitute goalkeeper unknown from Southampton, and everything to do with that. But Newcastle did not lose too many players, the same players that guided them to a 5th place finish last season. They even added on Malik Thiaw. I do not think he's been a good defender, by the way, or as good as they would have hoped he would be. But you have Nick Pope, whose performances have been really average this season. And you have what's happened to Dan Burn, Steven Botman, Fabian Schär's been oftentimes sick or injured. Kieran Trippier will be leaving the club at the end of the season. Tino Livramento has suffered through injury. Lewis Hall has been a bit of a spark of life in that team. You look at that midfield, Bruno Guimaraes, Jolinton, Sandro Tonali, of course, they've had their own fair share of injuries at some point. For Bruno Guimaraes and Joelinton, Joe Willock needed to step up. Anthony Gordon, highly praised, but I don't think he's that elite. I think he needs to take his game to the next level. I think he's sort of flatlined, regardless of what his numbers say this season. I think he has about 15 goals across the campaign in all competitions, 10 of those coming in the Champions League. Then you have Anthony Elanga, who is failed to find his spark in that team. You have Harvey Barnes, who has been average. You have Nick Waltmada, who had a good start to the season, but it's not gone the right way. Johan Wissa started the season with injury. He came back. He looked like he was going to step up, but then he lost his form again. William Osula, in the last couple of weeks, sort of had come out to say, I'm the one going to carry this team forward. It's not really worked out well. So you look around and can't help wonder what's really gone so wrong for this Newcastle side. Jason Tindo looks devoid of ideas to help his boss in Ed Howe. So it's a bit of a difficult game for Newcastle. Then for Brighton have been really swinging in action. They have European football in their side. They are 6th on the Premier League log. If they win this game, it further cements their credentials of achieving the goal. And Newcastle are in that bad a spell of form that they are there for the taking. For Brighton, Yassine Ayari, Gomez, Yankuba Minte, Danny Welbeck, Pascal Grob, Carlos Baliba, John Paul Van Hecke, Lewis Dunk, Bart Verbruggen, who is, by the way, being targeted by some big teams in German, and therefore Brighton could look to go to Manchester City and sign James Trafford should they lose Bart Verbruggen. But that notwithstanding, Kaoru Mitoma is one of those players that I really love to see perform so well, so consistently at the highest level. But unfortunately, he does not give you that. He's very inconsistent. He gave you a brilliant goal against Spurs. He may go another set of games without giving you a good performance. He's just that. He's similar to Takefusa Kubo at Real Sociedad. I look at them in the same realm. So we should expect a very good game, but one where I'm not too optimistic about Newcastle. I wouldn't be surprised if Newcastle lost by 2-1, by the way, on the day. Okay, quickly, let me retreat back to our comment section and let's see what you guys have to say. Where did I stop? Okay. That's what I mean after next. Okay. League One. Who is your 10 times bigger club? The AC Milan. Oh, AC Milan. Last I checked, AC Milan were 3rd on the standings of the Italian Serie A. I think Massimiliano Allegri has done fairly well, but they've just had too many draws this season, including the goalless draw against Juventus in the previous weekend. Okay, Ash says, who are they even in Champions League? At least we finished at the round of 16. Okay, fair enough. You're not even 1 out of 4 of AC Milan. Tell me if I'm wrong. Well, in terms of pedigree, obviously AC Milan are way up there. They are the 2nd most successful team in the European Cup / Champions League. They have seven accolades to their name, with Real Madrid at the summit of it with 15. So fair enough. Okay. Milton says Ed Howe is struggling with the team he has now. Exactly, he's struggling. And for those of you that are regulars on this broadcast, you know a gentleman called Raymond Kangumba, who often comes here with the same comment, and he's often alluding, even though the contextualization of it is often poor or lacking, he's always alluding to the fact that that Newcastle need to fire Ed Howe and appoint somebody. However, he himself cannot bring himself into a conclusion on who he thinks is the most preferred candidate for the job. Today you'll have preference for Zabi Alonso, tomorrow it will be Maresca, another day it will be Adi Huta, on another day it will be Francesco Farioli. So it will be Xavier Hernandez. So he's all over the place with his suggestions. But nonetheless, he thinks a managerial change is necessary. There's another Newcastle fan called Dennis Jukes. I've not seen him on the forum for a bit of time now, but he's the one who first indulged me in the conversation about Newcastle's need for managerial change, and his suggestion was that they needed to go for Jose Mourinho to take their project to the next level. But we'll have to wait and see what David Hopkinson, that's the CEO, and other minders of the club, what decision they take after the end of the season. Okay. Inter is better, okay. I can see Ash is taking a dig at Blastoise with saying Inter is better. Ultimate, Gordon, Wissa, Elanga are not a powerful attack this season. Yeah, they've not found their stride throughout the entire of the season. All of Brighton players are not consistent. Baleba also. Baleba had a brilliant season last season. This season, I think Yasin Ayari has been better. Please be honest about Tottenham. Will they be relegated? I'm baiting man. Okay. Now, what I'm giving you is not a betting tip. I'm simply giving you my honest opinion about Tottenham Hotspurs. First of all, I'll begin by saying, as a football fan, I wouldn't wish relegation against them. Nonetheless, I also do not wish relegation for West Ham. So if it's not going to be West Ham and Tottenham Hotspurs, somebody would say it is good. It has to be Nottingham Forest. I have nothing against Nottingham Forest, by the way. So I do not know how it's going to slice, but they really have some difficult games when you look at Tottenham for the remainder of their season. Of course, they are going to play on Super Sunday in the late kickoff at 9 p.m. But their next games being, you play Aston Villa, you play Leeds, you play Chelsea and Everton. That's not the kind of running you would want when you want to stay up. However, all those should be beatable opponents for Tottenham Hotspurs ordinarily, but not the Tottenham Hotspurs of this season. You'll hardly find a leg to stand on to say, yeah, they are going to beat Aston Villa convincingly, or they are going to do it against Leeds, later on against Chelsea, or a stubborn Everton side. So it's a difficult one. I'll put it this way. If West Ham win their game against Brentford, and win their game against Arsenal, because after playing Brentford this weekend, the next game will be against Arsenal. If West Ham win those two games, Tottenham will have no chance. That's my honest opinion. But I do not know for a fact that they are going to win both games. In any case, might I remind you, my prediction was that Arsenal will win the Premier League title. So therefore, I'll be rooting for Arsenal to win against West Ham. So that's why I said it's a bit of a difficult one. But trust me, you're better off betting against Tottenham getting relegated maybe after next weekend. I know it doesn't help your chances in terms of, I don't know whether the odds will still be as good, but that's how I can put it. Okay. Chipe says, I do not want to fight, but Tottenham is a more known team than AC Milan. That should mean something. What do you mean Tottenham are more known than AC Milan? I wouldn't want to think so. Now, let's not confuse two things. In terms of being a known brand, when you go back to the last 5 years, maybe, I'll understand that the Tottenham brand has been more sound. But overall, historical context, club profile, you cannot be comparing AC Milan to Tottenham Hotspurs. I understand when you have to go back to, let's say, anywhere between 2017 to date, to maybe last season when they won the Europa League. I understand if you think Tottenham have been more popular than AC Milan in terms of media coverage and things like that. I understand that bit. But if you're going to compare the two profiles of clubs, I'm sorry, we cannot be comparing AC Milan and Tottenham Hotspurs. We cannot be comparing them. That's just my honest opinion. It's okay if you disagree, but that's my humble opinion about that. Okay. Chipe says every team can be good. Let them play. What you have said, Tottenham, a more known club than the mighty AC Milan. How dare you? Ash says you do not even have a stadium. They have a stadium, the San Siro, which Inter Milan call the Giuseppe Meazza Stadium, I think. Okay. Okay, Spirit of LFC fan says you know everyone. What do you mean you know everyone? Better than having a big dog bowl of a stadium than Spurs have. Jesus Christ. I think this is getting out of hand. I mean, I'm not really into football, and Tottenham is a name I've heard of. I know Milan, but because of the city. Okay, fair enough. Chipes, why do you even hate Tottenham? Go watch Serie A. Okay. Then Blastoise said City, AC Milan is better than any club. Okay. AC Milan have no stadium. Forza Inter, that's from Kinseli, something like that, or Kinsella, something like that. Kinsella. Oh, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but it's FK something, you know. Ash says, go check Serie A table. Who is better? All right. Thank you guys for the continued engagement in the comment section. Allow me move on to or to drift back to the weekend preview that we are going through. Guys, like I said, this conversation will continue through the weekend. Of course, we have Friday night where we usually come at 9 p.m. Then we have Saturday when we usually come at around 10 a.m. So make sure you do not miss any of those broadcasts. Okay, quickly, let's go through this one quickly and look to wrap things up. Before we wrap things up, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Sunderland. Wolves have nothing to play for. Sunderland basically have nothing much to play for equally, apart from trying to finish as high up the table as possible. Mathematically, European places are still a possibility for Sunderland, but I don't think they're going to be able to achieve them. So basically, it's one of those games where, you know, doesn't produce so many draws. Wolves have won 4 out of 7 meetings. Sunderland only 2, who by the way won the first leg by 2-0, only 1 draw. So my expectation is that we should expect a very competitive game that could easily end in a 2-2 draw. In my humble opinion, both teams largely nothing much to play for. So Sunderland, I mean, over the last 5 meetings, have lost this fixture 3 out of 5 times. There's been 1 draw, and then there's been 1 victory for Sunderland. But the Sunderland we're talking about of this season has been quite the dark horse, has been quite the surprise package for everyone. Now, given that we have Asia, you will allow me skip the Arsenal game and jump to the Tottenham game, and then we'll do the Arsenal game, the Liverpool game, and Man United game. Okay, let's see what time allows us, but we can look to do the others on Friday night at or Saturday morning. But let's first skip the Arsenal game and go to the Aston Villa game. Aston Villa, like I said, they've lost the last 2 games across all competitions, in the Premier League and in the Europa League yesterday, by 1-0 of either fixtures. Okay, just a bit. Okay, Milton says most of the European leagues are dominated by a couple of clubs, but maybe the Premier League is more spread out. Okay, to read my name is like a chancellor, but use I instead. Like chancellor. Oh, I mean, thank you for thank you for indulging me on how to read your name, albeit I may still struggle. Chancellor. Oh, makes sense. Sort of makes sense. Anyways, like I said, let me drift to the Aston Villa Tottenham game. Very beautiful game. Should be an entertaining game. One that Aston Villa won by 2-1 in the first leg. One that they have won 3 out of the last 5 times of the two sides meeting. But the victories that Tottenham have registered in this encounter, when you go back last season, one of them was a 4-1 victory against Aston Villa, and there is another 4-0 victory when they went away to Villa Park. So when when Tottenham beat Aston Villa, they beat them emphatically. 61 meetings between the two sides, 15 draws, 20 wins for Aston Villa and 26 for Tottenham Hotspurs. It's usually a kind of game that promises you goals. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of the two sides won it 3-2. You know, it's a huge possibility. However, what kind of Tottenham would I want to see? Hi, Chancellor. A good to have you on the channel. Kindly like the podcast if you haven't already, but also please consider subscribing to it. If it is your first time here, at least to the best of my recollection, it is your first time here. So I want to see a very organized Tottenham Hotspur side, one that is keen not to concede, but also very intentional on trying to score, because the only way you win games of football is by scoring. You do not win games of football by being conservative whatsoever. So they ought to go for it. They ought to go for it. Otherwise, they have nothing, no leg to stand on. But as you go for it, we have that common adage in our language that says, as you chase a fellow man, leave energy that will help you to run back. Because when the tables turn, the same man can chase you backwards. So they must think of it that way. Like I said, in the terms of the context of it, all Tottenham are thinking is how do they survive? Last weekend, they registered their first victory in 2026, that 1-0 victory against Wolverhampton Wanderers. If you ever needed a stitch in time, go back to João Paulina's goal against Wolverhampton Wanderers that wins them their first game of football in this year. Could that be the spark that they've needed all throughout the season? Could that be the spark that they've needed ever since the turn of the year? Well, I think they have been here before, particularly not in the Premier League, but when they beat up against Atletico de Madrid by 3-2 in the reverse fixture of the UEFA Champions League, I had thought that maybe that would have sparked them into life to go and start winning some Premier League games. Unfortunately, it was not the case, because prior to that, they had drawn 1-1 against Liverpool, and you thought it had been a decent performance from Tottenham Hotspurs. They just could not replicate it or even better it. So, having lost Xavi Simons, that notwithstanding, I have no leg on to stand to say they are going to give you the kind of performance that is capable of beating up against Aston Villa. They, as a team, have the players or the tools capable of winning the game away to Aston Villa. You know, we're talking about an Aston Villa side whose confidence has begun to tumble. You've lost to Fulham by 0-0. You've lost to Nottingham Forest by 0-0. For Nottingham Forest, that's a game in the UEFA Europa League. For Fulham, that's in the Premier League. If they had to choose between winning against Tottenham and winning against Nottingham Forest next week on Thursday, they would choose winning against Nottingham Forest 10 times of every bit of asking. Why? Because winning against Nottingham Forest next week on Thursday, which they will have to think about, by the way, would guarantee their spot in the finals of the UEFA Europa League. Whereas beating up against Tottenham Hotspurs this weekend simply moves you maybe to parity on points with Liverpool if they manage to beat Man United, or if Man United beat up against Liverpool, you go above Liverpool. In other words, they have a leg room to stand on in terms of losing another Premier League game of football and still remain within the top 5 because they are 8 points clear of Brighton and Hove Albion, who are in 6th place. Whereas in the knockout competition of the UEFA Europa League, they have it all to do. It's a make or break, you know? So that's the context of it. You know? So I'll say this. So I'd want to think Tottenham have every motivation. But because they've not given us the consistency of results, trust me, I don't feel very encouraged. But I'm going to go on a leap of faith and predict that they will win this game by 2-1. I don't remember the last time Aston Villa lost 3 consecutive games, but I'm going to go on a leap of faith and say Tottenham will win this one by 2-1. The question is going to be, how do Tottenham set up themselves? I think Xavi Simons is going to be a huge miss. But Mickey van de Ven, Kevin Danso, Pedro Porro, Dejat Space, Bentaco, Bissouma, Akona Gallagher. Now, where you do not have Xavi Simons, who do you toss in there? Because Dominic Solanke equally suffered, I saw a bit of a hamstring. So it could be Rando Colomwani leading the lines, and maybe you play Richarlison to come off the flanks. How about the other side? You know? Unfortunately, they let go of maybe Matthias Tel. They let go of Brennan Johnson, which I didn't think was a good decision. Yeah, maybe you play Richarlison on one side, and then you play Matthias Tel on the other. Really, James Maddison will be waiting, you know? But because he's just returned back from that long-term injury, which is the anterior cruciate ligament injury, you really can't put a lot on him. You really can't a lot on him in terms of the expectations. For Aston Villa, yesterday they came out with arguably their best team. Emi Martinez, Matty Cash, Ensbury Konsa, Pau Torres. They had Amadou Onana in that midfield. They had Yue Chilamans. They had John McKean, Morgan Rogers, Ollie Watkins, you know, that whole team. So chances are that even if Aston Villa were to make changes, you would still expect to maybe a Douglas Luiz starts in that game to give Amadou Onana a bit of a rest, or Lamere Bogart. Maybe I don't know. Emi Buendia was in that game. I'm thinking, if you're Unai Emery, you have the tools to switch up things. You can go with the Tyrone Mings, Victor Lindelof, Tammy Abraham to lead the lines. Jordan Sancho would start. Ross Barkley to be in there. Douglas Luiz in midfield. You would play an Ian Matson. Find room for Leon Bailey. Of course, keep Emi Martinez in goal. And, you know, have a bit of rotation because, like I said, that game is going to be very important for them going into next week. So because I think there could be a change of guard in terms of the core playing staff, that's where I stand to think that maybe that's where Tottenham find their breakthrough and squeeze it in and win the game by 2-1. You know, it's like I said, I'm just going on a leap of faith on that one. You know, I'm going on a leap of faith. So we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah. Okay. Retreating back to some of your comments, I can see. Read. Okay. No. We did that. Ash says, who is bigger club considering their history and players AC Milan or Bayern Munich? Oh, both teams have really brought some really great players. At AC Milan, you've had the likes of Kaka, you've had the likes of Alessandro Costa Curta, You've had the Paul Maldinis, the Inzagis, Clarence Seedorf. You know, I mean, AC Milan have a very rich history. You've had Zlatan, of course, playing there, but I mean, uh, you cannot really underestimate AC Milan's history. Like I said, they're the second most successful team in Europe. Of course, Bayern Munich are within the same realm, or I would put them in the same bracket. They're not miles apart of each other, if any, by the way. Bayern Munich, you've had the Gerd Mullers, the Thomas Mullers, you've had the Kahns, so many. Like, both clubs have a very rich history of football, one that you cannot underestimate, one that you cannot underestimate, really. So in terms of their pedigree overall, I wouldn't put them miles apart. You see, I think let's not use the period because, okay, when you go to the German Bundesliga, Bayern Munich is overly dominant. It's like the biggest club there, and all the others are like class B teams. Do you know how you hear the phrase class two citizens? So basically, that's what you have in the German Bundesliga. Whereas in the Italian Serie A, you have a bracket of teams that are within the same realms in terms of being competitive. AC Milan, Inter Milan, Juventus, Napoli in recent times. So at one point it used to be AC Roma, although they've not won the league in forever. So, but at one point when Lazio still had Simone Inzaghi as their coach, had come back in competitive levels. But basically you have Inter, AC Milan, Juventus, Napoli. You have that sort of bracket. Whereas when you go to the German Bundesliga, I mean, you have to go back to Bayer Leverkusen in 2024 when you had a team other than Bayern Munich win the league. Then you drift yourself back to 2013 and 2012 when Borussia Dortmund won it. Then you have to go back to, I think, Wolfsburg. Then you go back to, was it Schalke or Werder Bremen at some point, like back in the days. But when you look at the last 25 years or so, predominantly it's Bayern Munich, predominantly it's Bayern Munich. So that's the context. Chancellor says, what's your honest thoughts about Arsenal on the Premier League and UEFA Champions League? Do you think they are confident to win it? Okay, about Arsenal and their fortunes in their respective competitions. I've said this and I'll say this again. They have a higher chance of winning the UEFA Champions League than they have the Premier League. And I know that's a bit controversial because they've never won the UEFA Champions League. But the reason as to why I say that is because in terms of the Premier League context, they relinquished their leverage, their advantage to Manchester City. And if all games are played and all teams have won, we saw that Manchester City have scored more goals than Arsenal, and that's what had put them above Arsenal on the Premier League table. And even if it's that whisker thin of a margin, it's what would qualify for Man City to win the Premier League title at the expense of Arsenal. Whereas in the Champions League, they are still unbeaten. They are in the semi-finals. They are 90 minutes away from booking a place in the final or bowing out. And once you get to the final, you have a 50% chance of winning it the same way your opponent. Of course, depending on which opponent comes through, whether it's Bayern Munich or PSG, when you assess both teams, how they play, etc., one may sort of have the advantage or may be seen as the favorite over the other. But because Arsenal have never won it, obviously the favors or the who is ever deemed the favorite will fall on the other side because PSG won it last season, which was their first time. Bayern Munich have won it 6 times if they want to come through. So, but it's a case, it's a competition where you make your case in 90 minutes. There's nowhere round about it, you know. Whereas in the Premier League, yes, they still have 4 games left to play. You play Fulham, very stubborn side. You remember last season, it's one of those teams that cost you points. Remember the 2-2 draw and the 2-1 defeat at Craven Cottage. You go to West Ham, which is the next game after that. You remember in the 2023-2024 campaign, I think, West Ham holding Arsenal to a 2-2 draw after Arsenal had taken a 2-0 lead. You remember West Ham last season beating Arsenal by 0-0, that goal by Gerard Bowen. In other words, in the last 4 games that you have to play, you have 3 London derbies: Crystal Palace, West Ham, and Fulham. Not easy games to win, but still winnable fixtures. But then it brings you fast forward to how Arsenal have been playing recently. They have played like a team, suffocating under pressure. Sometimes those players have run like they have weights tied on their legs. So, in other words, their performances have been far from convincing for you to, as an Arsenal fan or otherwise, to have full confidence in their abilities. They have the players that can do it. They're just not doing it. So, in regards to the Premier League, I thought they conceded their advantage to Man City. So, they still have a chance to win it and their chance to win it is in only one way: taking care of their business, win all your remaining games, and then, after doing that, hope that Manchester City falter somehow, somewhere, or that they do not score as many goals. But as we speak, Man City have scored more goals. Arsenal played one more game than Man City. So that's how I'd look at it. But thank you so much, Counselor, for our question. You say it's a bit late here in Mexico. I'm already going to sleep. See you or on another live. Robert, thank you so much, Chipes. It's been a pleasure having your company on this morning's broadcast. Milton says Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Man City are all dominant because of their managers and squads. Okay, fair enough. Tottenham or Dortmund, Real Madrid have always been built to try and win the Champions League. There came a point in time when they looked at La Liga as a class 2 or as a second title, you know. Then, okay, Tottenham or Dortmund, history and players. Dortmund, 97 Champions League winners. Now, there are 2 types of Dortmunds. You remember the Dortmund of Jurgen Klopp. I'd try and compare, although not so much with similarity, but I'll try to compare Jurgen Klopp's Dortmund to the Tottenham Hotspurs of Mauricio Pochettino. Those 2 sides were more or less at the same level. Unfortunately for Tottenham Hotspurs, in the Premier League, it never materialized for them to win anything. But when you look at the outlook of things, they had some similarities in terms of, you know, having a good coach who was not very fortunate. We're talking about a Dortmund side that lost the UEFA Champions League title in 2013, losing to Bayern Munich. Fair enough. So did Tottenham Hotspurs in 2019, losing to Liverpool. We're talking about a Tottenham Hotspur side that challenged for the Premier League title and finished second in 2016-2017 season. Dortmund, on the other side, in 2012-2013, they won it. So I'd say Dortmund slightly edged for me in comparison to Tottenham Hotspurs. That's what I'd want to say. In terms of producing players, you have to go back to Mario Götze, Marco Reus, Lewandowski, Mats Hummels. Of course, that's still the core team. On the side of Tottenham, they've had some really, really decent players. Forget not, Gareth Bale was a Tottenham player. Did Gary Lineker play for Spurs? So there's a name I'm forgetting in the context of Tottenham history. He was a striker. No, and it's not Robbie Keane, it's not Dimitar Berbatov, it's not Pavlyuchenko. Pavlyuchenko hardly had any history with Tottenham. But in terms of the 2 sides, because Tottenham, I think, won the European Cup. Yes, at some point, they won the European Cup. In terms of brand, in terms of profile, they're not 2 miles apart. They're not 2 big miles apart, I would want to say. Do you know what's Blastoise? Thank you for your insights. Now I know where to put my money. Bye, man. Little bit upset cause of Blastoise. Oh, sorry about that. Sorry you feel that way. But guys, do the one thing you ought to keep yourself in check of is the acceptance that everybody is entitled to their opinion, whether you agree with it or not. And sometimes, if you feel it's not worth a debate or an argument you having over, if you think somebody is arguing to win, because there are two types of arguments, actually three. There are people who argue to have a response. There are people who argue to win. There are people who argue to learn. Oftentimes, I prefer to argue to learn. You teach me something, I teach you something. And that's why our mantra says, for the fans, by the fans. I want to learn from you guys as much as you learn from me, for every time somebody has a piece of knowledge to share. So when it comes to exchanges about your respective clubs, I know it's emotional because you are attached to that club, and if somebody is taking a dig at it, you're going to feel a certain way. That's only human. But find it always within you to stay measured in a way. Okay. Then Milton says, Robert, are we looking at the 2026 season currently? Not yet. Not yet. I think we need to first conclude this one, because how we conclude this one has an impact on how we go into next season, whether you like it or not. However, some people are already looking towards next season. I'll give you an example. I read a quote. Apparently, Mason Mount told Daily Mail that he sees Manchester United winning the Premier League title next season. It's his opinion. So he's already looking towards next season. But we'll have to wait and see on that. So I think I've finished the Tottenham game as well. Yes, Tottenham Aston Villa. I've given you my honest opinion about that. But maybe before we close this one out, I can see it's been 1 hour and 32 minutes. One last game. Guys, what's the one last game that you want me to preview? And you have to choose amongst this one. Arsenal versus Fulham. Bournemouth versus Crystal Palace. Those are the two games. You have to choose one. Because Man United Liverpool will do at night. That's for the Friday night broadcasts. Then Chelsea, Nottingham Forest, Everton, Man City. We have all the time to go through them. Even if it means Monday morning, even if it means Monday morning. Even if it means Monday morning, So let me know, which one should I look through? Should we go to the Bournemouth game against Crystal Palace and preserve the Arsenal game for later? But okay, as I wait for your response, guys. Reports have indicated that UEFA's disciplinary body are waiting for the official referee's report before deciding if action should be taken against Arsenal's Declan Rice for his post-match comments. Rice said, I think the fans provoked the decision and changed the referee's mind. He was speaking in context to the... he was speaking in context of the overturned decision of the penalty on Ebeleche Eze. That's what he was speaking about. That's what he was speaking about. So he felt, in his opinion, that the fans had an influence on the referee. I don't want to look at it that way. I remember last night I had a friend of mine who was telling me that Diego Simeone had an impact on the referee changing his mind. Yes, I know he was animated and the antics and all that. But if it's going to be that simple, I have every reason to believe that VAR caused him to change his mind. First of all, I said this before. In my opinion, it's a penalty because he's given it. Two, it's not a clear and obvious error from the referee. Therefore, VAR are not obligated to intervene. What that meant is that yesterday was a prime example of a non-on-field referee trying to officiate the game, or having an influence on the game. I do not know the kinds of communication exchanges that they had with the referee because they keep talking with their, earpieces. So I do not know what's happened there. But the one thing I can say is that because once they are in your ear, they are capable of influencing you to change a decision. And this is what I said as well. Referees ought to remember that being sent to the monitor does not necessarily mean that they change their decisions. No. Basically, what VAR should be is those guys to say, we think you need to have a second look at this. And then you go and they show you every possible angle that they want to show you of the incident that they're making reference to, and you make your judgment. But oftentimes, I feel that they go beyond that. I feel they go beyond that as to interpreting the laws for the referee. The referee on the pitch already knows what the rules are of the game. So he is capable of dissecting them by himself. And in this particular case, a referee has been compelled to change that decision because of VAR intervention. That's VAR trying to officiate the game. That's a referee other than the one on the pitch having an influence of the game. Go back to the Bayern Munich penalty against Alphonso Davies. I know ball to hand is not a rule or a thing, but it is still an act of the game. And that's where your common sense has to prevail. To say, look here, guys, my interpretation of this is as such. Because the ball goes off his thigh and hits his arm, I'm not giving this as a penalty. There's no clear intention for the player to handle the ball. He does not move his hand in the direction of the ball, but rather the contact of the ball on his other part of the body changes the course of direction of the ball before it hits the arm of the player. I understand that school of thought. Go back to referee Farai Halam when he was officiating Wolves versus Manchester City in the 37th minute when he's refused to award a penalty. He's called to the monitor and he's summoned to the monitor and to make a decision on whether whether that should be a penalty or not. They tried as much as they could to influence him to change his decision, but he stuck with his decision. And that's what we are saying. You do not necessarily have to change your mind. You do not necessarily have to change your decision just because you've been sent to the monitor. So I believe that's a critical element of the game, So, okay, Milton says the UK season is September 2025 to May 2026. More like August. So August 2025 to May 2026. Essentially, that's the campaign across major leagues in Europe. Of course, in other countries, things may be different. Particularly for Uganda, it's not any different. But for Kenya, they play calendar year, January to December, something like that. So you have those kinds of instances. But anyways, guys, it is what it is. So first of all, I do not think I've never understood this. When a player or a manager comes out with their own assessment of an incident in a game of football, and then they say he's going to be sanctioned, I'm oftentimes thinking to myself, what's the cause of the sanction? I have given my assessment of a view of an incident. I've not been derogatory in a way. I do not think I put the game in disrepute in giving my honest opinion to say, I think the fans provoked the referee into making a decision or changing his decision. That's just my honest opinion. That's just my interpretation of the scenario, of the circumstances that has happened. Why then must I be penalized, quote unquote, have disciplinary action taken against me just because I made an assessment of the game? It's something that frustrates me even with the Premier League. I often ask, if it's not the manager, the captains, who is going to defend that team? Who is there to say the referee had a poor game today? Who is there to say the referee was wrong? Who is there to say we felt that the referee did not officiate the game in a neutral manner? What should that be? I believe a head coach or a manager of the team is the team's number one lawyer, and therefore it's their responsibility to defend their team. So sometimes it doesn't sit well with me when managers and players are penalized for certain things that I feel that are a bit petty. Of course, I understand when language is extreme. I remember, for example, the case of Rodrigo Hernandez Cascante, where he said the referee has to be neutral, as though to suggest that the referee showed a lack of neutrality in their 2-2 draw against Tottenham Hotspur sometime in this season. I understand that bit, that even in fair assessment, we must stay within a certain language or acceptable language. But I do not want to disqualify, I do not want to disabuse of managers and players of their right to make fair assessments about players. You've seen managers come out of a game and say, I prefer not to speak, because they're going to be sanctioned. To say, I prefer not to speak, or if I speak, I'm in very, very big trouble. Why? Because they want to give their honest opinion. The same way we critique players and managers, of course we do this as fans. But I feel even managers should be allowed to critique referees on days when they do not have good performances. Of course, the referee's report will indicate something, and etc, etc, But it is what it is. It is what it is. Anyways, guys, allow me to wrap it up here. Thank you, Milton. Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you so much, Blastoise. Thank you so much, Chipes. Thank you so much, Ash, for having been part of this morning's broadcast. Africa will never unite. Always a pleasure. Who else? Who have I not? First, last. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to see you around. Every single one of you that has been part of this morning's podcast, thank you so much for dedicating the time to be part of it. It's always a wonderful conversation. It's always a pleasure to see you guys around. Your engagement, your company is what encourages us to keep going. So until next time, stay blessed. Bye-bye for now.